we are going through Canto 3, Chapter 27, which is entitled Understanding Material Nature, and texts 4 to 5. So before I begin with the texts, so just to reiterate where we're at. So a couple of chapters ago, I believe in Chapter 25, we started a conversation between, let me just check. Yeah, in Chapter 25, we started the conversation between Kapila Muni and his mother, Devahuti. And his mother, Devahuti, had basically approached Kapila to inquire and understand about spiritual life, about the means by which one can escape the hellish conditions of material life. And so from chapter 24, from chapter 25, Kapila Muni started to explain the process of devotional service, specifically through a style of philosophy called Sankhya, which basically means to break everything down into its constituent components. And so in chapter 26, what we really hear about is the analysis of the material world by Kapila Muni. He explains a detailed breakdown of various things like the 24 elements or the different tattvas that exist. He explained about the concept of pradhan, which means the unmanifested form of matter. Then he talks about the mahatattva, which is the manifest form. Then he talks about the false ego with the three modes. He talks about the mind, the senses, the sense objects, and so many different things. And then he also starts to explain how the creation is actually a progression of evolution. How from the unmanifest comes the manifest, comes the false ego, comes the mind, the senses, the elements that actually form the universe. And also the role of time, how Kala actually acts like a catalyst for that evolution process to take place. And all of this is basically there with the Supreme Lord overseeing the entire creation, the entire cosmos, such that it enables creation, it enables order in the creation, and also enables the living entities to be the material nature to be impregnated with the living entities. And all of this is there specifically to help us understand the distinction between matter and spirit, how the living entity, the jiva or the purusha, is distinct and different from matter. And so he ends chapter 26 by talking about how through the process of liberation, one can understand that difference, or through practicing devotional service and coming to a stage of self-realization. And so in chapter 27, if I just share my screen, this one. So in chapter 27, we start off, which is entitled Understanding Material Nature. The very few verses, what we learn about is basically how the spirit soul becomes influenced by the three modes, and through that influence, it misidentifies itself to be the material body. And because of that misidentification, the spirit soul, the spirit soul basically goes through different bodies, i.e. the transmigration that we learn about in the Bhagavad Gita. And so then we come to text 4. Any volunteers to recite the Sanskrit, the translation, and yeah, keep it at that for now.
अर्थे हय विद्यमाने अपि संसृतिर्न निवर्तते ध्यायतो विषयानस्य स्वप्नेनानर्थगमो यथा.
Thank you, Prabhu. Translation also.
Actually, a living entity is transcendental to material existence, but because of his mentality of lording it over material nature, his material existential condition does not cease. And just as in a dream, he is affected by all sorts of disadvantages. Hare Krishna.
Thanks so much, Prabhu. So the first thing before we get into the purport, I think it's important for us to, well, I found it quite interesting to call this out. That's what I was thinking about going through these verses. The very first part of the line of this translation is actually living entity is transcendental to material existence. We understand from Bhagavad Gita and various texts when we hear Srila Prabhupada and various teachers that the living entity is actually described to be part of the Jiva Shakti, or the marginal potency of the Lord, right? So we've got the internal energy, the marginal energy, and the external energy. And immediately in the translation, Kapila Muni is explaining that, look, actually, the living entity is transcendental to material existence, meaning the marginal potency, it's beyond the material energy. Because we understand the marginal potency is part of Krishna's spiritual energy. It's part of Krishna's internal energy in certain ways. From the Bhagavad Gita, we understand there's a very nice verse in chapter 7, verse 5. Aparayam itastvanyam prakritim vidime param jiva bhutam mahabaho yayedam dharyate jagat. Krishna says, besides these, O mighty armed Arjuna, in verse 4, he was talking about the different elements of creation. Besides these, O mighty armed Arjuna, there is another superior energy of mine, which comprises the living entities who are exploiting the resources of this material inferior nature. Krishna is saying there that there's apara shakti, or the inferior energy, where he's talking about the elements of creation. So like you've got the 5 gross elements, then you've got the mind, the false ego, the intelligence. But then there's the param shakti, which is the superior energy, and he describes that to be the jiva bhutam, right? So that's comprising the living entities. And so Krishna is saying in that verse that the living entities are superior to the material energy. But we have a tendency to enjoy, to desire, to possess, to control. And that's what takes us into the cycle, if you see here. But because of his mentality of lording over material nature, his material existential condition does not cease. Because we have the tendency and the desire to control, we keep coming back into this material world because we keep wanting to enjoy independently of Krishna. And that's the origin of our material existence. And here it's described to be just as in a dream. So when we go to the purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Purport. The example of a dream is very appropriate. Due to different mental conditions, in dreams we are put into advantageous and disadvantageous positions. Similarly, the spirit soul has nothing to do with this material nature, but because of his mentality of lording it over, is put into the position of conditional existence. When we think of a dream, we understand that a dream actually has a very real experience for us, right? When we're in a dreamlike state, whatever we're experiencing, we find it to be true, find it to be very relevant, and as if it's happening to us in that moment. But then once we wake up, everything in the dream goes away. And it doesn't matter whether you're having a nice, happy dream where, I don't know, you're being served so nicely, everybody is coming and bringing all these paraphernalia, all these different types of foods to you, or you're having a nightmare where you're constantly in anxiety in the dream. You wake up and everything's gone away, but the experience was so real for you that sometimes you see, or you may have had experience of it yourself, where if it was a nightmare, a very horrific nightmare, you're waking up and your arms are sweating, your head is sweating, you're like breathing deeply because it just felt so real for you. But was it real? Well, we understand that it was just a dream. And in the same way, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that our material existence is just like we've been put into a dream where there's good things that happen or bad things that happen. And therefore, they're not actually real in one sense. It's not that they are imaginary or fake. In the Vedic or in the Gaudiya Vaishnav understanding of how the material world exists and is present, we understand that actually material nature is still a part, like we spoke about, it's still a part of Krishna's energy. So it isn't imaginary or fake. It's unreal in the sense that it's temporary. We understand that everything spiritual is described to be Sat Chit Ananda, right? Eternal, full of knowledge and full of bliss. But when we talk about material things, they're described to be Asat, Achit, and Ananda, which basically means that it's temporary, it's full of ignorance, and it's it's devoid of any sort of bliss, real lasting bliss. Meaning, one way you could see it is that it's full of dukkha or full of suffering. So then we go on. Conditional existence is described here as dhyayato vishayanasya. Vishaya means an object of enjoyment. As long as one continues to think that he can enjoy material advantages, he is in conditioned life. But as soon as he comes to his senses, he develops the knowledge that he is not the enjoyer. The only enjoyer is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So here we see how Shilpa's describing what is the um, thing that's binding us to that dreamlike state of existence. And it's this idea that we are the enjoyers. We understand that actually in the material world, and we all have experience of this, that actually whenever we search for enjoyment in the material world, it's always temporary. It's always flickering, or in Sanskrit we call it chapala sukha, because it's always coming and going. How many of us have ever searched for suffering in life? When was the last time we searched for suffering? We went to Krishna and said, "Oh Krishna, oh Radha Gokulananda, I haven't had suffering for a long time. Please give me some suffering." We don't pray that. We ask if we do for happiness, for service, if we're spiritually minded and able to. We ask for service. But if we have some tendency to want to enjoy, then we ask for some happiness, for some satisfaction, for peace. But just as in the same way we never ask for suffering, but suffering still comes in our life, in the same way, we don't actually have to search for material enjoyment, material happiness, because it will come of its own accord. And even when it comes, like I mentioned, it's flickering happiness. Flickering because even when you endeavor for happiness in a material way, it brings suffering in different ways. One way it brings suffering is that you might endeavor for something material, right? Let's say you, let's say I have a strong desire to have a brand new car, and I will try and try. I'll try and earn enough money. And somehow or another, when I'm thinking, yes, I'll be able to get a car now, somehow or another, I just can't buy a brand new car. So what happens? Frustration. I'm thinking and looking at everybody around me and seeing how every devotee in the temple has got a brand new car since 5 years ago. And I'm still stuck with the same car that I bought 10 years ago. So then I'll be frustrated. Another way suffering can come from material happiness is where you endeavor, you get it, but then it's just not good enough. I endeavored hard for a brand new car. I got a brand new car, but then I'm thinking as I'm driving it, actually, this isn't comfortable. This isn't peaceful. I don't think I can drive more than half an hour in this car. My old beaten up Volkswagen VW was perfectly fine. So then we think it's not good enough. And that brings its own anxieties and frustrations. Another way that suffering can come is that we endeavor, we get it, and we get the joy that we really desired from that thing. But then that happiness doesn't last. The classic keeping up with the Joneses. You buy that brand new car, you're happy, You're looking around, you're seeing, you've got the best model. Nobody else has got the same model of Tesla that you've got, the brand new, I don't know, 2026 model. But then in 2 months, a new model comes out, and lo and behold, in the Bhaktivedanta Manor car park, as you drive in, you park your car, and the car next to you is the latest model of the same car you've just got. And the happiness no longer lasts. And another way suffering can come is that you endeavor, you get it, and with it, suffering comes by nature. I guess I use the example of a car, not because I bought a car recently, but because I have first-hand experience of going through these different stages with a car myself many years ago. I wanted a brand new car with my name on the registration as the logbook, the first name that comes up in the logbook. I got the car, it was okay. The happiness didn't last because as soon as you get the car, a brand new car, the value of the car goes to 50% straight away as your name goes on the logbook. And then with it came the anxiety that every single day I'm looking out of the window, checking, making sure nobody's scratched the car, nobody's nicked the car, no bird poo has dropped on the car. And so with that car comes so much anxiety, so much more mental space gets used up in trying to maintain that happiness or that material object of enjoyment that we've basically endeavored for. And all of that comes from us wanting to continue that, to think that we can enjoy the material advantages that we've basically endeavored for. But as the last part of the sentence says, for the only enjoyers, Supreme Personality of Godhead, because we don't understand that actually life is not for us to enjoy, it is for the Supreme Lord to enjoy. So as I go on. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 5:29, is the beneficiary for all the results of sacrifices and penances, Bhoktaram Yagnatapasam, and he is the proprietor of all the three worlds, Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. He is the actual friend of all living entities. But instead of leaving proprietorship, enjoyment, and the actual position as the friend of all living entities to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, we claim that we are the proprietors, the enjoyers, and the friends. Yeah. So here we see how our mentality of thinking, as it says here, that we are the proprietors, the enjoyers, and the friends, is actually misdirected. Because in reality, the only proprietor, the only enjoyer, and the only friend is really the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. In our life, so many times, and even now, we can have a misunderstanding that actually things are there for our enjoyment, our family, our friends, our resources. They're there for us. They're there for us to enjoy. But actually, through our spiritual maturity and our endeavors and our sincerity, we have to come to this realization that actually everything that is bestowed upon us actually belongs to Krishna and Krishna alone. In the Ishopanishad, the very first verse, we have Ishavasyamidam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bhunjita magrita kasyasvid dhanam. We see that everything, or translation, everything animate or inanimate that is within the universe is controlled and owned by the Lord. One should therefore accept only those things necessary for himself, which are set aside as his quota, and one should not accept other things, knowing well to whom they belong. Whatever's given to us is actually given to us as if we are caretakers for the Supreme Lord. We're there acting on behalf of Krishna for what belongs to Krishna. Sometimes we hear the example from spiritual teachers, and I believe Srila Prabhupada also, the example of a shopkeeper and a shop worker. The shop worker spends so many long hours each and every day working in the shop. And especially if you go to like a very nice example is if you go to like Govinda's or something, you see so many devotees there constantly serving and working in the shop non-stop. And they have the benefit that they can take whatever is required for them to sustain themselves. You know, they don't have to pay for eating at the restaurant because they're working there. So if they're hungry for lunch and they run their break, they can just get that piece of pizza or whatever it is that they want to eat or to sustain themselves. But the profits of the shop are not something that the shop worker can take advantage of. They can't go, oh, I've worked all these 8-10 hours in the day. Now I can take the profits from the shop. No, the shop worker is working on behalf of the shopkeeper, and therefore the profits belong to the shopkeeper, not the shop worker. The shop worker can only get as much as is allocated to him to sustain himself off of the work that he's doing in the shop. And so in the same way, we as we live our lives, especially as devotees, we have to constantly endeavor to remind ourselves and develop our consciousness in such a way that actually everything that Krishna has bestowed upon me, whether it be my relationships with family and friends, whether it be the money that I am getting at work, whether it be the skills and the abilities and the contacts that I'm developing at work or in various places, social places that we're going to. It is all there for us to use that in service to the Lord. And when we have that realization, then actually can we act in a way that is truly of service to Krishna. Because there we'll actually understand that we are not the ones doing these things. We are not the ones who are actually the friends and the family members of all these people. It is actually Krishna alone. So if I go on, we perform philanthropic work thinking that we are the friends of human society. Someone may proclaim himself to be a very good national worker, the best friend of the people in the country, but actually he cannot be the greatest friend of everyone. The only friend is Krishna. One should try to raise the consciousness of the conditioned soul to the platform of understanding that Krishna is his actual friend. If one makes friendship with Krishna, one will never be cheated, and he will get all help needed. So here we see that actually the endeavor of the devotee, the endeavor of welfare activity is to encourage and inspire people to realize that actually the greatest thing that one needs, and really the deepest thing that one needs, is a loving relationship with Krishna, because Krishna is really our best friend. But sometimes what happens is that even as devotees, we start thinking that the reason why things are happening is because we are making it happen, right? We may go out on the streets and distribute so many books and we're thinking, yes, it is because I am such a great devotee, because I have developed the skill and the techniques and I've mastered the art of distributing books. But actually, it has nothing to do with us. The only thing it has to do with is the fact that we are connecting them to Krishna and helping them realize that Krishna is their best friend. In some places, I've heard the example or the understanding that actually book distribution is always in the favor of Krishna. Because there's four, I'm going to call them people involved in the distribution of books. There's the distributor and then there's the receiver or the recipient. But inside the distributor, there is the soul and the super soul. The soul is desiring that this person, this recipient, receives the book. The super soul within the heart of the distributor is also desiring that this person receives the book. And within the recipient, there is also the soul and the super soul. And the super soul is wishing that this fool and rascal will take the book. And so really, it's all about between the super soul and the soul of the recipient and whether the book is taken or not. Because the soul is fighting for the false ego that no, 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 I mustn't take the book. But the super soul is saying, no, 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 you must take the book. And therefore, we as the distributor have actually nothing to do with that fight within the heart of that person. We are just there as supporters, as cheerleaders, with the soul and super soul inside us, to cheer the super soul within the recipient's heart, to encourage the super soul to keep pressing harder, to make sure that the soul receives the book. So where is the glory that we can take there? Because it's purely down to the super soul in the heart of the recipient, that whether they are able to convince and whether the soul is willing to listen to the super soul or not. And so actually, our endeavors have nothing to do, or the success of our endeavors has nothing to do with us. It's all down to the mercy and uh, the blessings that we receive from Krishna and the Guru. We know a very famous verse in the Bhagavad Gita, Karmanye vadikaraste mapaleshu kadachana makarma phalahetur bhur mate sango swakarmani. This idea that the only thing that we have a right to do is perform our duties, right? We're not entitled to the results. We're not entitled to the outcomes. We're not entitled to anything other than just doing our duty. And also, we're not allowed to be attached to not doing our duty. And also, we cannot consider ourselves to be the cause of the results of what we have performed out of our duty. And so it's this idea that actually the only thing in our hand is to perform our duty or to not perform our duty. But the skills, the knowledge, the mercy, the outcome of what we are endeavoring for is all given by Krishna and Guru. And so we can't actually claim any credit for anything that we're doing. In the Bhagavad Gita also, we know that Krishna says, I think it's in chapter 11, 10 or 11, where Krishna tells Arjuna, Nimitta matram bhava savya sachin. I think that's the right phrase. Nimitta matram. This idea that, oh Arjuna, just become my instrument and fight the war. Because Krishna is already saying in this part of the Bhagavad Gita that, look Arjuna, I've already killed everyone. Yeah, chapter 11. I've already killed everyone. You just have to become an instrument and take the glory for having all of these great warriors be killed. And this is how great Krishna is. Krishna could be a friend who takes credit for everything he's done. He could be that person who takes credit for things he's not done. But here is Krishna, such a great leader, such a great inspiration, where he has actually performed all the work to kill every single living entity. And he goes, Arjuna, come here, you pick up the sword, you pick up the bow and arrows, and just, fight, shoot your arrows, swing your sword around for a bit, and you can take all the credit of all of these great, great warriors being killed. And so then it brings the question of what is success for a devotee? If whatever we are doing, if the outcome, if the results are up to Krishna, whether it's a success or failure, that's up to Krishna, then are we guilty of mistaking the success and failure of a service that we're performing to be a reflection of the depth of our devotion? Sometimes we can mistakenly understand that, oh, a service has become so successful because of how great a devotee is. But equally, we will see that somebody who has just come brand new to Krishna consciousness, they endeavor for a service and they get it straight away. It becomes a huge hit, a huge success. because that's up to Krishna. The success for a devotee is actually in the humility that they're able to carry, the humility that they recognize and appreciate that the outward success of the service is not dependent on them. It's not by their doing that the service was successful. It's having the humility to recognize that I had nothing to do with it. I just had to get out of the way and allow Guru and Krishna to act through me to attain the success in service. And that takes a lot of hard work. Who of us will go about and perform a service of mass scale or minor scale? Doesn't matter, but how many of us will do a service and then completely step away and say, nope, doesn't matter what has happened to the service, no matter how good it is. Maybe you've decorated the altar in the temple room. How many of us actually have the level of awareness and humility to just step away and let everybody appreciate the altar in the temple room, but not utter a word of how we were involved in that service? Not even slightly. But that's the level of humility that will determine or that's the humility that will determine the success of our service in terms of the internal transformation of our heart. Then going on. Arousing this consciousness of the conditioned soul is the greatest service, not posing oneself as a great friend of another living entity. So very much the same point. The power of friendship is limited. Although one claims to be a friend, he cannot be a friend unlimitedly. There are an unlimited number of living entities, and our resources are limited. Therefore, we cannot be of any real benefit to the people in general. The best service to the people in general is to awaken them to Krishna consciousness, so that they may know that the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend is Krishna. Then this illusory dream of lording over material nature will vanish. The best service to the people in general is to awaken them to Krishna consciousness, so that they may know that the supreme enjoyer, the supreme proprietor, and the supreme friend is Krishna. Many of us may have heard like motivational speeches on like welfare activities. I remember when I was quite young, I don't remember how old, but some charity workers, like motivational charity workers, had come to school. And they were, I can't remember which country in Africa, but they were supporting different villages in very uh like very underdeveloped areas of Africa. Obviously, generally Africa is, relatively speaking, especially relative to the likes of UK or America, quite underdeveloped, but they really were focusing on certain villages or certain tribal areas that were really underdeveloped. And they came with this really nice expression, which we would have heard in various capacities in different ways and cultures and communities. And they were really emphasizing how they're helping the poor community, right? And why the help that they're giving is the best type of help. This idea that if you've got a village, they're struggling, they're underdeveloped, they don't really know what to do, you could help them out by bringing them ready cooked food, right? And how far would that help reach them? Well, they'll be satisfied for a meal, maybe 2 meals, right? So then they were saying, well, that's not scalable. That's not enough. So then what's the next best thing that can be done? Well, you could bring the raw materials, right? Bring grains, mass grains, bring obviously there'd be meat eaters and stuff like that. So bring like mass fish and so many raw ingredients that then the people of that village could then buy or save, whatever it is, hoard it for some time, and then they'll be able to cook their own meals. How long would that last? Couple of meals, couple of days, a week at most, and then the raw materials will start going off. And so their idea was that the best way to actually help communities develop is by teaching them how to look after themselves, by teaching them how to fish, how to grow their own food, how to harvest, and all these different things. And then that will help that community grow and sustain themselves, not just for a lifetime, but for generations, because then one generation will teach the next, will teach the next, and so on and so forth. And that sounds very nice. That sounds amazing, because you have just solved a problem that that community was going through, where they couldn't make ends meet, right? They had no idea where their food was coming from the next day. But if you taught them how to make their own food, then that problem goes away. But then we come to the Krishna conscious philosophy and understanding that actually, is that the best type of help we can give? Is that the best welfare activity for any living entity? And then we come to the Bhagavad Gita and we hear Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi Dukkha Doshana Darshanam. That there are actually four very fundamental problems of human/material life. Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadi. Birth, death, disease, and old age, or old age and disease. Jara is old age. Even if we help these communities, the living entities, on how to sustain their life, how to pass that sustenance or that skill of sustenance through different generations, they're still going to experience the miseries that come with birth, death, old age, and disease. We haven't helped them in the fundamental problems of life. And so actually, what is the best welfare activity? The best welfare activity would be solving the fundamental problems of life. And so that's where Sri Prabhupada very encouragingly, throughout all of his purports in the Bhagavad Gita, he brings us to this point that actually the best way we can help ourselves and help the people around us is by giving them access to spiritual wisdom, by making the spiritual wisdom accessible, relevant, and present for everybody and anyone. Because what the spiritual wisdom can then do is by just even through that small association that may come with that spiritual knowledge, they get the understanding, they get the knowledge, they get the awareness of how to uplift their consciousness such that they can become free from these four fundamental problems of material life. And that's the duty of a devotee. The duty of a devotee is to serve Krishna and serve Shri Guru. And Krishna and Shri Guru constantly emphasize this one point, as is mentioned in Chaitanya Charitamrita. Yara dekhe tara kaha Krishna Upadesh, Amara Agnaya hoy, Amara Agnaya Guru Hana Tara Edesh. This idea that everybody should become a guru. Becoming a guru doesn't mean that one has to initiate people. It means that one must spread Yara dekhe tara kaha Krishna Upadesh, that wherever you go, whoever you meet, just spread the glories of Krishna. Instruct everybody to come to this point of recognizing that I am an eternal soul and my relationship, Jiva Rasul Krishna Nityadas, my relationship with Krishna is to constantly serve him with love. And some of us may be thinking, well, how do I do that? I'm not an eloquent speaker. I'm not somebody with a charming character. I don't have strength in Shastra. I don't. But all of this comes when we have a sincere desire, when we have an inherent need for the people around us to be uplifted, when we have a deep longing to serve Krishna and Guru. Because, like we started off speaking about, none of this comes from us. None of the knowledge that one has acquired, none of the character that one is able to present, none of the ability to speak and present very nicely comes from us. It comes from Krishna. And so if we sincerely desire and pray to Krishna that, look, I want to serve you. I want to spread your glories. I want others to know about their relationship with Krishna. Just as I've been given the opportunity to learn about you, to develop my relationship with you, I want everybody around me to have that opportunity too. Then Krishna himself will empower us to be able to do that. And it's not about attracting followers. It's not about having many likes and subscribers on social media, but it's genuinely about wanting the other person to get access to the diamonds and the jewels that another devotee has bestowed upon us. Because how many of us would be in Krishna consciousness by our own endeavors? How many of us came walking into Bhaktivedanta Manor or ISKCON Soho, whichever temple is closest to you, came in thinking, yes, today I'm going to walk into the temple and walk out with chanting beads, with Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, with a Srimad Bhagavatam set, a CC set, and become a devotee? Very few, if at all. Most of us would have walked in and come out like that because we met a devotee who sincerely desired and prayed for us to connect with Krishna on a deeper level. And so, go to verse 5. Okay, I'm conscious of time. Any volunteers to recite the Sanskrit and the translation?
I can do, Prabhu.
Yes,
Prabhuji.
please. Yes, please.
At eva shaneshchitam prasaktamasataam pathi bhakti yogena tivrena virakya cha nayadvesham. It is the duty of every conditioned soul to engage his polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment, in very serious devotional service with detachment. Thus, his mind and consciousness will be under full control. Thank you.
Thanks so much, bro.
Thank you.
So, chapter 5. So immediately what really stands out for me is conditioned soul to engage its polluted consciousness, which is now attached to material enjoyment. So this idea that we're leaving off from the previous verse, right? Where we are basically under the influence of the three modes, but we have the opportunity to go beyond it. Is very serious. It is the duty of every conditioned soul to be very serious in devotional service with detachment. Thus, his mind and consciousness will be under full control. So it's the idea that if we control our mind and senses, if we engage in devotional service, then we can control our mind and senses. So purport, the process of liberation is very nicely explained in this verse. The cause of one's becoming conditioned by material nature is his thinking himself the enjoyer, the proprietor, or the friend of all living entities. So we already spoke about this in the previous verse, whereby our desire to enjoy, our desire to control, is basically the cause of our conditioning in material life. This false thinking is a result of contemplation on sense enjoyment. So here what we learn and what we are seeing is that when we contemplate on material things or on sense enjoyment, right, or the sense objects, what happens is that in the mind, there is a subtle desire to enjoy it. And in that moment, we may or may not act on that desire. But the fact that the desire is there, the seed is planted. And as that seed gets watered with different sort of thoughts or contemplations that come up in similar sort of frames with similar sort of themes and areas of life, at some point, we end up acting on that desire. And so we hear the classic phrase of thinking becomes our acting, right? When we're thinking something, when we're contemplating on it, that becomes our action. And so if we think about something material, eventually we act by doing something material. And what we're seeing and reading here is that that becomes the cause of our conditioning. But equally, if we think about and contemplate on doing something spiritual, then eventually we'll act on that, and that can become the cause of our liberation. So then moving on, when one thinks that he's the best friend to his countrymen, to his countrymen, to society, or to humanity, and he engages in various nationalistic, philanthropic, and altruistic activities, all that is just so much concentration on sense gratification. Now, this is interesting. Okay, actually, let me read the next part. The so-called national leader or humanist does not serve everyone. He serves his senses only. That is a fact. Now, Srila Prabhupada is very heavy in this section, whereby he's basically saying that anybody who's trying to do welfare work in a philanthropic, nationalistic, altruistic sort of way is actually not done out of, or not necessarily born out of a selfless cause. It's actually, as he says here, he serves his senses only. It's actually quite selfish. How do we understand this? In the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 17, she didn't bring it up. Let me just bring it up. In chapter 17 of the Bhagavad Gita, there are some nice verses on describing charity. So text 20, 21, 22. So text 20, charity given out of duty without expectation of return at the proper time and place and to a worthy person is considered to be in the mode of goodness. But charity performed with the expectation of some return, or with the desire for fruit of results, or in a grudging mood is said to be charity in the mode of passion. And charity performed at an impure place and improper time to unworthy persons or without proper attention and respect is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So here we see that there's charity which is described to be in different modes. And what are those modes? Goodness, passion, ignorance. We understand that there's three modes of material nature. The goodness is the best because that is most fulfilling, most wholesome. Ignorance is worst. But actually, there's something beyond the three modes, which is the mode of pure goodness, where it's spiritual, where it's spiritual engagement, spiritual activity. And so whilst on the outset, if I just go back, whilst on the outset, it may seem like this sort of charity, right? These sorts of activities, welfare activities, are actually really, really good. As an activity, charity is generally considered very good, even as Vaishnavas. However, the activity alone does not determine whether that activity is a selfless or a selfish activity. The other contributing factors are our intention and desires that and our attitude that goes into that activity. And so when we go back to the modes, we see that the best type of charity within the three modes is that which is in the mode of goodness, which is out of duty, without expectation of return, at a proper time and place to a worthy person. It's this idea of performing an activity because we know it's the right thing to do. And we're doing it, or we're giving the charity to somebody who actually is in need, who is actually going to utilize the charity we've given in a positive and good way. But the other thing with the mode of goodness is that actually sometimes the intention and the attitude isn't necessarily in a form which is in the mode of goodness also. Because here, this is talking about the act of charity, right? The act of charity is done in this way. But the intention and the desire may be that actually, you know what? I've given some charity. I've done this philanthropic work. Look at the recognition I'm getting. Look at the happiness that I'm feeling and experiencing by giving charity. And therefore that could, to some degree, fall under mode of passion also. Expectation of some return, maybe not, but with a desire for fruit of results. Fruit of results here doesn't necessarily have to be gross. It could also be subtle enjoyment. And so like this, charity itself can be quite complex. And so when we read Shabbat's purport like this here, the way I personally read this is that charity in itself is actually a very good, positive, pious thing. But what's the deeper intention? What's the deeper attitude behind that charity? Is it truly coming from a place of selflessness? Or is there some tinge of selfishness? And the way you could test that is if the people or if the project you are donating to or donating meaning could be financial charity, it could be time charity, whatever it is. If they are truly a good cause and they are, and you are not getting anything out of it at all, not even appreciation, would you, and in fact, if there was some negativity you were getting from it, would you still be able to give your resources to that charity, to that charitable cause? And if the answer is yes, then maybe it's charity in the mode of goodness, provided you meet the other items on the bill. But if there's some hesitation, then we know that actually a part of the reason why I'm giving this charity is because I'm feeling good in some way, shape, or form, which is therefore serving the senses. And so, as we move on, but the conditioned soul cannot understand this because he is bewildered by the spell of material nature. It is therefore recommended in this verse that one engage very seriously in the devotional service of the Lord. This means that one should not think that he is a proprietor, benefactor, friend, or enjoyer. He should always be cognizant that the real enjoyer is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the basic principle of Bhakti Yoga. One must be firmly convinced of these three principles. One should always think that Krishna is the proprietor, Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the friend. Not only should he understand these principles himself, but he should try to convince others and propagate Krishna consciousness. We see that the mode of pure goodness, or charity in the mode of pure goodness, in terms of the intention and the attitude, is really one where the devotee has this mentality of being convinced about these three principles, that Krishna is the proprietor, Krishna is the enjoyer, and Krishna is the friend. When we perform charity or any activity with these three principles at the forefront of our consciousness, then we are actually able to give true devotional service and true charity to Krishna. Because then we recognize that it's not about how I'm feeling or what I'm going through and experiencing in this service. It's actually, is this pleasing to Krishna? How many of us wake up each day and are excited about chanting our rounds, and we chant all of our rounds with the same enthusiasm as we once chanted or started our experience of chanting in this life? Very few would be able to put their hand up on that. But we endeavor and we engage, ideally, with the mood and the thought that it doesn't matter whether I'm enjoying chanting or not. It's not about my experience of chanting. It's not about my taste of chanting. It's about the fact that, so we go on knowing that me calling out Krishna's names is pleasing to Krishna. And therefore, whether or not I'm getting a taste in the chanting, the success is not in whether I feel happy whilst chanting. It's whether Krishna is happy from my chanting. And we know Krishna is most pleased when we're calling out his names in a pure state of consciousness where we are constantly endeavoring to focus our mind on Krishna and service to Krishna and praying and meditating to be of service to Krishna. But those rounds where we are chanting with an absent state of consciousness, where we're maybe going through the shopping list in our mind, replaying that argument, that discussion, that conversation from yesterday, preparing for what am I going to cook for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or thinking about the project at work. We know that those rounds will feel like to Krishna that this guy, this Bhaja Govindam is calling out to me, but I'm trying to listen to him, I'm trying to pay attention, but he's just not paying attention to me. It's like being on a phone call with somebody and you've got your phone, next to your ear, but you're speaking to or doing other things and you're not paying attention to the phone call. That's how Krishna feels, that why are you on a phone call with me if you want to think about and do all these other things? But if we constantly remind ourselves that actually everything we're doing in spiritual life is to please Krishna, then our thoughts, our desires, our needs go in the background. And it all becomes about what is going to be most pleasing to Krishna. And how do we do that? In the next section, we see, as soon as one engages in such serious devotional service of the Lord, naturally the propensity to falsely claim lordship over material nature disappears. That detachment is called vairagya. Instead of being absorbed in so-called material lordship, one engages in Krishna consciousness. That is control of consciousness. When one engages in when one engages in tivrena bhakti yogana, in intense devotional service, very seriously, as it's called out here, in serious devotional service, then the tendency is to contemplate on material things. It naturally starts going away. And we all have experience. We all will have experience of this in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's in chanting, whether it's in reading, whether it's performing some sort of devotional service, physical devotional service, or active as part of the mission, whereby something's on our mind, something's happening, we're going through an experience, but then we just engage in Krishna's service, and all of a sudden, that thing that's been on our mind for 5 hours has now just gone away. In the Katha Upanishad, a very nice, and this actually comes up in the Bhagavad Gita briefly in one of the verses. It's described how it's an analogy of a chariot with the body. So the chariot itself is the body, and then you've got the 5 horses, which are like the senses. And when the senses are left untamed, they're described to be like mad horses, constantly pulling one in different directions. And that's material life. The nose wants to go and smell these things over here, or the tongue wants to go to this restaurant that has just opened up and to taste new food. The eyes want to go to a cinema to watch the latest Hollywood, Bollywood, Tollywood movie. The ears want to go and listen to a concert from the latest pop, jazz, R&B, whatever it is these days, K-pop, whatever songs. And like this, the senses are constantly pulling us in different directions. But the practice of spirituality and spiritual life in general is about taking control of those senses. That is control of our consciousness, right? So Krishna consciousness, Sri Prabhupada describes, or engaging in Krishna consciousness, is controlling our consciousness. Why and how? Because when we're seriously endeavoring in spiritual life, then what we're saying and doing is, you've got those mad horses, your senses are there, but we're taking the reins that those horses are tied to and handing them over to Krishna by engaging in devotional service. And so we're saying, Krishna, you're in control of the direction of these horses. And so Krishna then directs the horses, the senses, in the right direction, which is to engage in his service. So we smell the tulsi leaves and the incense available at Krishna's lotus feet. We engage our tongue in eating very nice prasadam, and if it's not prasadam, we say no. We engage our eyes in seeing the beautiful form of the deities in the temple, whether at home or in the temple building itself. We engage our ears in hearing Krishna Katha and spiritual discourses like on Chad Plus twice a week or 3 times a week, 4 times? Don't remember anymore. Like this, we engage our senses in different ways because we're understanding that, okay, handing the reins to Krishna means we follow what Krishna wants from us in our life, and that is to engage in devotional service. And the way to engage in devotional service is prescribed to us through the scriptures, through the acharyas, through Srila Prabhupada's teachings. The yoga process necessitates controlling the senses. Yoga Indriya Samyama. Since the senses are always active, their activities should be engaged in devotional service. One cannot stop their activities. If one wants to artificially stop the activities of the senses, his attempt will be failure. This idea that our senses are always active. We can never actually stop our senses from acting, but we can direct them and engage them in an appropriate way. Even the great yogi Vishvamitra, who was trying to control his senses by the yoga process, fell victim to the beauty of Menaka. There are many such instances. Unless one's mind and consciousness are fully engaged in devotional service, there is always the opportunity for the mind to become occupied with desires for sense gratification. This is really important. I was going to share a story from the Bhagavatam about a great sage, I forget his name, Shobra Muni. I won't narrate because I'm conscious of time, but yeah, if you wanted to, it's Shobra Muni from Srimad Bhagavatam. But in a very short form, it's basically a great sage who had complete mastery over his senses, and he was completely detached, such that he was disappointed from living in a communal environment because he would be disturbed in his meditation all the time. And so he decided that he's going to go and perform meditation whilst under the water. But what's being described by Srila Prabhupada here is that no matter how hard one tries to control the senses by nature are active and they will need to be engaged in some way. Because what happened with Shobra Muni is that underwater he saw 2 fish copulating, i.e., enjoying each other's company. And that agitated him, and therefore he wanted to go and engage his senses in that way. And it's a very important lesson or a pastime, because what we learn here is that no matter how much you have learned, no matter how much knowledge you have of scriptures even, controlling the senses without engaging them in a higher activity, there is still a high risk of misusing the senses. I.e., if you don't control the senses by engaging them in something better, you will by default engage them back into something which is derogatory by nature. And so one must engage seriously in devotional service. This idea of Tivrena Bhakti Yogena, this idea that we must engage in intense devotional service, such that when we're controlling the senses, like a tortoise is pulling its limbs inwards, we pull our senses inwards when it's looking at engaging in Maya's service or in the service of material energy. But we take the limbs out and intensely engage in devotional service such that the senses can be correctly and appropriately utilized and engaged in something beneficial for us and everybody around us. One particular point mentioned in this verse is very significant. It is said here, prasaktam asatam pati. The mind is always attracted by asat, the temporary material existence. Because we have been associated with material nature since time immemorial, we have become accustomed to our attachment to this temporary material nature. The mind has to be fixed at the eternal lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Sarve mana Krishna padara vindayo. One has to fix the mind at the lotus feet of Krishna, then everything will be very nice. Thus the seriousness of Bhakti Yoga is stressed in this verse. I guess I'll end on this point that through this verse and even other verses throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, we hear that actually casual devotion is not good enough. Just casually being a devotee, yeah, we've got spiritual life, we've got the sanghas on a Monday, get what other days, Wednesday, Sunday evenings, and I'm probably missing a day. It's nice, you know, I get my spiritual boost then. And then the rest of the time, we're just engaged in family life, in work life, in engaging and entertaining our senses. If we want to perfect our life, if we want to attain control of our senses, such casual devotion is just not good enough. We hear throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam and throughout the purpose of Srila Prabhupada that one has to engage in Tivrena Bhakti Yogana, an intense devotional service, by which one, by hook or by crook, engages the mind and their energy and their time in Krishna's service as much as is physically and mentally possible. So much of our life we waste. 24 hours of a day, how many hours, if we sat down and counted where every minute was spent, how much of that is actually being wasted? How much of that is actually not helping us progress in our spiritual life? Going to work helps us because then it maintains our family or maintains our home, and Bhajan Kutir, the place where we chant and read and attend sanghas from. But then what are we doing with the remaining time? How are we engaging our family time? How are we engaging our eating time? How are we engaging our free time? All of these we have to really introspect and look deeply at, and really come to this point of trying to slowly but surely engage more and more of our life in Krishna's service. Otherwise, we fall prey to complacency, to default habits, to the common phrase that everybody has, which is, I have no time. So yeah, so I'll end there. I'm conscious we are over time, so thank you so much. Guess to summarize the two verses 4 and 5. In verse 4, we primarily heard about and the focus on how what keeps us bound to the material world is basically just that dream state. And in verse 5, we especially emphasize on how the practice of devotional, intense devotion, not only gets us out of that dream state, but it keeps us out of that dream state. So I'll end there. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Any questions, comments? Reflections? No? In that case, we can end. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubheva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Anantakoti Vaishnavinda ki jai, Shripad ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki
Jay.
jai,
Jay.
Chatas ki jai.